Thank you indeed. Speaking first in opposition. Order. Shh. Thank you. Speaking first in opposition, we have Sir Robert Buckland. Sir Robert has been the Conservative Member of Parliament for South Swindon since 2010. He has previously served as the Secretary of State for Justice and Lord Chancellor, as well as the Secretary of State for Wales and the Minister of State for Prisons and Probations. Most importantly, he has served as President of our sister society up north, the Durham Union.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much to members of this august sister union. It's always a pleasure to speak at Cambridge, and indeed a pleasure to be in such wonderful company. I'm very touched by Emily's comments. I was thinking about our shared love of music, and I thought of the musical Annie, Get Your Gun, where the great protagonists sing, anything you can do, I can do better. And that's the whole point of tonight, because you've got a motion before you which is great catnip, to use our other shared love, for opposition politics. Pastime. It's a lot of eating dust and not being able to get things done, and I can understand the frustration that my friends, and there are many friends on the Labour benches, have about opposition. But out there in the real world, there are two tests for a government to fail. One is the test that Emily says she's made out tonight, which is that this government is so awful that anything they can do, they will do better. But there is a second test, which is the test that opposition is truly ready for government. Now, I know she would say that the onus is not on her tonight to say much about that, because she clearly didn't. But it might be something for all of you to think about as considerate, discerning members of the Cambridge Union as to really where you should place your vote tonight. Now, I'm not going to go into a long litany about the flip-flops and the indecision and the non-comments of the leader of the Labour Party as to HS2, but of course I'll give way.
Is this the same Sir Robert Buckland who switched his endorsement to Liz Truss when you found out she was about to win?
Well, if you want to know the real reason for that, it's because we managed to ditch something called the Bill of Rights, which I think both Emily and I agreed was a bit of a pig's breakfast of a proposal, which I was more than happy to oppose, because I came into politics to deal with policy and to try and make a difference for the country. And I believe that all of us, on both sides of this House, are here for sincere reasons. So may I, first of all, with relish, utterly reject the main plank of Emily's argument that somehow the Conservative Party is not governing in the national interest. I can tell you that the Conservative Party is all about the national interest, always has been, always will be. And this Prime Minister is the embodiment of somebody who takes considered decisions, who thinks carefully, who looks at the detail and does his homework. Whether you agree with the decision or not, the idea that somehow Rishi Sunak does things on the back of a fag packet is, I think, way clear of the mark. You might have been able to say that about one or two of his predecessors, but not Rishi Sunak. Look at the evidence, members, as to the reality of this. And when Emily says, you know, what has this government ever done for us? It's a bit like the life of Brian, isn't it? What have the Romans ever done for us? I can tell you, the list is long. When you look at what we inherited in 2010, we'd had a Labour government that had managed to electrify 10 miles of railway track. We have, in our time in office, electrified 1,200 miles. How's about that for infrastructure investment? And I'll give way in a moment. Then we have the very important question to millions of people about jobs and unemployment. I can tell you that when Labour left office in 2010, unemployment was running at 8%. It is now under 4%. That's people's lives we're talking about here, and it's an embodiment of what a responsible Conservative government believes in, because contrary to the brickbats and the views of the left, most of us in politics, and certainly on the Conservative side, have come in to politics to elevate the condition of the people, to do everything we can to alleviate poverty, which is why the triple lock, which Emily mentioned, is of course an achievement. Guess who of this government? I'll give way to the lady there.
Created 1.3 million jobs, but mainly self-employed, temporary, zero-hour contracts. And of those 1.3 million jobs there are about 30,000 that are full-time. Is that why that most self-employed people are living under the poverty line? Is that why 29% of children are living in poverty? Do you care about children?
Yes, which is why there are fewer children living in workless households than ever before. Again, an achievement of some callous Conservative government. You see, the reality is way different from the perception that is peddled by the left. Look at the jobs that we saved during COVID, the 12 million jobs that were on the line because of that unprecedented peacetime challenge. And we talk about net zero. I'll give way in a moment. Net zero. Net zero. Do you know in 2010, renewables only accounted for 8% of electricity generation? They're now 42% and rising. Is that a government that isn't committed to green economy? Of course it's not. And everything that we're doing, the investments that we're making are designed to achieve that. And when Emily talked about net zero, I can tell you the manufacturing targets for the motor industry remain the same. There is no difference between what we saw at the beginning of September and what we see at the end of September. What we saw was, I think, a genuine attempt to make sure that the drive to net zero, legally binding as it is not done on the backs of those who can afford it least. That is why he took the action that he did. And I think I had an intervention here, yes.
Yeah. How are we simultaneously on track to net zero when we've just opened Rosebank, one of the biggest oil rigs in the North Sea, which is going to keep extracting until 2051, a year after our actual net zero target? The other thing I'd add is the British taxpayer is going to pay 91% of the costs, but the rig is actually owned by 8% Norwegian state and an Israeli energy company, and they're going to take all the profits immediately to international markets. So we're never even going to see that oil or fuel. And working
all right.
less well-off people are going to receive no benefit from that at all.
Look, again, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I'm afraid that is not right, because Rosebank was already accounted for as part of the emissions that we would make, and it's either that or the importation of expensive and dirty fuel from other countries. I'm sorry, I disagree with your analysis, because what we've got to make sure is that as we reach that legally binding goal, we do it in a way that is fair and that does not destroy the important jobs that we have in regions of the country that can, frankly, do with them. And that's why I think the Prime Minister was right to make the decision he did. But there's so much more that I want to talk about in the very brief span that I have. Look at what the government has done on transforming the law on domestic abuse, on creating the law of stalking, of coercive control, no-fault divorce, ending the rough sex defence, introducing world-leading modern-day slavery legislation. All these things have happened during a Conservative government. And when I look at the NHS and the pressures that we're under, I remind myself that in 2010 we were spending 132 billion on it. We're now spending north of 182 billion. Remember that context is everything, and that whilst it is easy for opposition to make their points and make their barbs, the reality is somewhat different. And on education, yes, I'll give way.
Thank you. Context is key, right? So, for example, for domestic abuse, it took about 13 years to put the ratification of the Istanbul Convention into law. On things like any domestic abuse or rough sex, for women's rights, abortion is still not legalised in this country. And on things like, which one last one? Brain freeze, I don't remember. The point is context is key, and you've had 13 years, and there are many things which are small successes, things slipped in. So, for example, the police crime sentencing bill was used, for example, for buffer zones, but it was also used to infringe on the rights of hundreds of people. So you can't pass a massive turd through the toilet and say it was great because it had one bit.
Well, I'm not going to descend to toilet metaphors, but what I will say is that it was this government that made these achievements and made these changes, albeit, and I think the opposition were very helpful and supported the work that we did, but, that work could have been done years before 2010, so that point, I'm afraid is not a fair one, bearing in mind the amount of work that's been done to transform the law and to really make sure that agenda is at the top of government's priorities. Somebody else wanted to intervene. Come on, let's have another intervention. Yes.
Same government that passed the Public Orders Act and the Illegal Migration Act. Thank you.
All right, well, I can tell you, I know a lot of argument about the Public Order Act. I think it is entirely right to balance the importance of free speech with the rights of other people to go around their everyday work and to travel to work in a way that they would want to. That's what we were trying to strike there, and that's what I think we struck properly. I was going to come on to education in the remaining 90 seconds that I have. You know, I am proud that you are the product of an education system that has improved consistently in international tables in the last 13 years. And in 2009, we were 25th in the table, into the PISA table for reading. We're now at 14th. In fact, we're in the top 20 on every metric that we see on education. That is a solid Conservative achievement. And I've been more than generous in taking interventions because I relish the prospect of defending a government with a strong record, a government that deserves to be returned for another 5 years to deliver a vision of improved public services and living standards for millions of people in this country, as we continue to do, against a vacuous Labour opposition that is just learned how to do the job of opposition but is nowhere near ready for government. I urge you to oppose this motion.
Thank you indeed, Sir Robert.